I don't want you here. Mountain Man told the obese girl he saved, then begged her to stay. I don't want her, the man in the brown hat said loudly. She's too fat to be worth the feed. You should pay me to take her. The laughter that followed cracked through the dusty air of Redemption Creek like a whip. Maggie Sullivan stood in the center of the town square, 23 years old, nearly 250 pounds, and feeling every ounce of shame pressed into her skin by 100 staring eyes. Dust clung to the hem of her faded blue dress, her boots were too tight, and her heart felt like it had been nailed to the scaffold everyone seemed to think she belonged on. Her father didn't laugh. He just spat into the dirt and jerked a thumb at her as if she were a mule. $50 and she's yours, Silas. She eats like 3 men and works like half of one. I'm done wasting good food on a useless girl. Maggie dared to look at him, hoping, begging for even a flicker of doubt. His gaze slid past her as if she were nothing but a shadow. Her mother, thin and pinched, folded her arms. We posted marriage adverts from here clear to Cheyenne. Not a single man wanted her. Too fat, too plain, too slow. God knows we tried. There's nothing else to be done. Each word drove another splinter into Maggie's chest. She pressed her hands together so tightly her nails bit into her palms, trying not to cry. Crying would only make it worse. Crying always made it worse. Silas Crane, owner of the Red Lantern Saloon and the meanest pair of eyes in 3 counties, stepped closer. His boots scraped around her like he was circling a hog at slaughter. He smelled of whiskey, sweat, and smoke. "Turn around," he ordered. Maggie didn't move. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging into soft flesh, and spun her roughly. A few men whistled. Someone called, "Careful, Silas, she might make the floor sag." More laughter. "She'll do," Silas said, his grin as ugly as his soul. $50 for a fat back and strong arms. She can scrub floors, haul barrels, and wash dishes till her fingers fall off. She eats scraps and sleeps in the storage room. She runs. I'll have the sheriff lock her up for theft. Agreed? Her father stuck out his hand before Maggie could even breathe. Agreed. The slap of their palms sealing the deal was louder than any gunshot. In that instant, Maggie understood it with brutal clarity. She had never been a daughter, not really. She had been a debt, a burden, a problem to get rid of. Silas shoved a folded chit into her father's hand and yanked Maggie forward. "Come on, girl. You belong to me now." No one stepped in. No one spoke up. No one even turned away. The town just watched as Silas dragged her across the street toward the Red Lantern, her feet stumbling on the rutted ground, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. If you're listening to this, maybe you've stood somewhere like that too, alone in a crowd, judged just for existing. Tell me where you're listening from, out there in the world. Comment your country, your city, your little corner of the map. Because stories like Maggie's start in one small town, but the feeling that travels everywhere. At the saloon, the real hell began. 16-hour days, broken plates and broken skin, drunken men snapping their fingers and calling, "Fat girl, more whiskey." Silas's voice always cutting through the noise. "Move faster, cow, or I'll find someone who can." 3 months later, on a night when the street outside the Red Lantern was empty and the moon watched from behind thin clouds, Maggie found herself shoved into the back alley by Silas and 3 of his favorite drinking partners. The door thudded shut behind them. "No one will believe a fat whore like you," Silas hissed, fingers clawing at her dress. "Might as well make you earn your keep." Maggie screamed. The sound bounced off brick and darkness and went nowhere. Rough hands pinned her arms. Cold air hit her skin as fabric tore. Panic choked her lungs. Let her go. The words rolled in from the mouth of the alley like a low storm. Deep, dangerous, final. Four heads turned. A shadow filled the narrow entrance taller than the doorway, broad as the sky behind him. A man made of fur, leather, muscle, and scars, with eyes that burned like coals in a winter hearth, stepped forward. "Get your hands off her," the mountain man said. Silas Crane straightened, wiping blood from his knuckles with a sneer. "This ain't your business, stranger. She's my property. Paid good money for her." The man who filled the alleyway didn't flinch. He was easily 6'6", shoulders broad enough to block the moonlight. His coat was made of wolf pelts stitched together with sinew. A long beard, streaked with iron gray, framed a jaw carved from stone. He was wild in the way mountains were wild, old, immovable, dangerous. His voice was a winter wind scraping over rock. "She belongs to no one." Silas snorted. "You got a problem? Make it your problem somewhere else." The mountain man stepped forward. 3 feet, 2, 1. Silas's smirk faltered. "I'll say it once," the man growled, "and only once. Get your hands off her." Silas lunged with a knife, filthy blade flashing in the dim light. He didn't even get close. The mountain man moved with startling speed, catching Silas's wrist, bending. A sickening crack split the air. Silas screamed and dropped the knife. The other 3 men scrambled. One swung a bottle, one threw a punch, another tried to grab Maggie again. The stranger fought like something not entirely human. His fists were hammers. His boots were boulders. The alley rang with the thud of bodies hitting dirt. Groans filled the air. One man crawled away. Another lay unconscious. Silas curled into the corner, cradling his broken wrist. Then the stranger turned toward Maggie. The fury left his face the moment his eyes met hers. He crouched to her level, hands gentle as snowfall. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though her knees wobbled. He shrugged out of his massive fur coat and wrapped it around her torn dress, covering her shaking body. For the first time in months, she felt warm. "Come on," he murmured. "You're safe now." And she believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. He lifted her onto his enormous stallion as if she weighed nothing. When he mounted behind her, she could feel the heat of him through the thick fur, solid, protective, unyielding. They rode into the night, away from the town that had never once seen her as human. Maggie didn't speak. She couldn't. She just clung to the front of the saddle and let the stranger's steady presence steady her breath. Hours later, dawn softened the sky. They reached a clearing tucked deep in the pines. Smoke curled from the chimney of a sturdy log cabin built into the hillside like it had been part of the mountain for 100 years. "Home," the stranger said simply. He lifted her down, careful with her bruised arms, and ushered her inside. Warmth hit her immediately. The scent of pine, leather, herbs drying on the rafters. The cabin was tidy, functional, and unexpectedly peaceful. "Sit by the fire," he said. "I'll make coffee." Maggie obeyed, sinking into a chair by the hearth. The flames licked upward, lighting the room with a soft gold glow. Only then did she realize her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. He noticed. "You're in shock." He draped another blanket over her shoulders. "Drink this." The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her throat, then her chest, then her fingers. "I'm Tobias Blackwood," he said at last. "People used to call me Black Toby." I'm Maggie Sullivan, she whispered, feeling small in the cabin, smaller yet in front of him. Tobias nodded once, as though memorizing her name. When did you last eat? She tried to answer, but her voice cracked. I don't remember. He turned to the stove. Soon the cabin filled with the smell of frying bacon and fresh bread warming over the flame. When he placed a full plate in front of her, Maggie hesitated. Go on, he encouraged softly. Eat. You're safe here. She obeyed. Every bite felt like rediscovering something she'd forgotten existed. Flavor, warmth, fullness, kindness. As she ate, Tobias watched her, not with disgust or pity, but with quiet concern. When she'd finished, he rose. You'll sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor. Maggie shook her head. I can't. It's too much. His eyes softened, but he didn't waver. You've had enough taken from you. Let me give you this. A lump rose in her throat so large she couldn't speak. As he helped her to the bedroom, her gaze snagged on something, a quilt on the bed. Hand-stitched, floral, feminine, curtains sewn from patterned fabric, a carved wooden comb on the dresser, the lingering memory of another woman. Tobias followed her gaze and stopped. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and raw. She died 10 years ago. My wife, Sarah. Maggie turned to him, but he was already facing away. You look like her, he said softly. Too much like her. Maggie's heart sank. Then I shouldn't stay. No, Tobias whispered, his voice cracked open. I don't want you here. He paused. But God help me. I don't know how to let you go either. For the first 2 days, Tobias barely spoke. He rose before dawn, hauled water, chopped wood, tended snares, and skinned rabbits behind the cabin with a grim efficiency that made Maggie feel like an intruder in someone else's life. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't snap at her. But every time she moved too close, he flinched, not out of disgust, but something deeper, sharper, like a wolf withdrawing from a memory that still bled. Maggie tried to stay out of his way. She cooked, swept, mended a torn curtain, folded blankets. She wanted to be useful. She wanted desperately not to feel like a burden. But that wasn't what softened him. It happened on the 3rd morning, when Maggie, still bruised and exhausted, tried to carry a bucket of water from the stream to the cabin. The bucket was too heavy. She staggered, slipped on a wet patch of moss, and fell hard onto her knees. The bucket tipped. Water spilled over her dress. She stayed kneeling, shoulders trembling, not from the cold, but from humiliation. She pressed her hands to her eyes, trying not to cry, but tears came anyway, hot and bitter. Tobias saw. He crossed the clearing in 3 massive steps. Maggie. She shook her head, unable to speak. He crouched beside her, his shadow falling over her like a shelter. That was when she felt it, his hand, large and warm, settling on her back. The gentleness of it broke her. I'm sorry, she choked. I just wanted to help. I'm always too much, too heavy, too slow, too... Stop. His voice wasn't harsh. It was a command wrapped in something like pain. He took her by the shoulders and turned her toward him. You're not too anything, he said. Not here. She blinked through tears. But you don't want me here. He exhaled slowly, the breath shaking through him. I said that because I'm afraid. Of me? Of losing you? The words stunned her silent. He helped her stand, lifted the bucket with one hand, and carried it to the cabin like it weighed nothing. Maggie followed, unsure if her heart was beating too fast or not at all. After that moment, something shifted. He didn't speak much, But Maggie began to see the cracks, the places where warmth leaked through his armor. She saw it when he cooked breakfast without her asking, sliding an extra piece of bacon onto her plate as if he thought she wouldn't notice. She saw it when he sharpened her sewing needles one evening, silently laying them beside her mending basket. She saw it most clearly the night she found him outside, standing at the small grave beneath the twisted oak behind the cabin. A stone marker, a woman's name carved in Tobias's rough, careful hand. Another marker beside it, tiny, heartbreakingly small. Maggie froze several feet away, not wanting to intrude, but Tobias turned, sensing her presence like an animal who'd learned to watch every shadow. "I come here every night," he said, "for 10 years. Maggie stepped closer, though her instincts begged her not to make him relive what clearly tore at him. "You loved her very much," he nodded once. "She was everything I ever wanted and everything I failed to protect." Maggie swallowed. "It wasn't your fault." "That's what people told me, but they weren't there. They didn't hear her screams. They didn't hold her as she—" He cut himself off, jaw clenched. "She was built like you," he said softly. "Strong, round, beautiful. People said she'd never make it through childbirth. I didn't care. I thought love would be enough." Maggie felt herself trembling. "I'm not her." "No," he said, voice rough. "You're not." His gaze swept over her slowly, like he was seeing her for the first time. "And that's what terrifies me." They stood in silence, broken only by the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. That night, when Tobias returned to the cabin, he left the door open for her instead of shutting her out. The next morning, he asked her if she wanted to come with him to check the traps. His voice was stiff, awkward, as if unused to offering companionship. She said yes. They walked together through the forest. Tobias pointed out elk prints, explained how to tell the age of a tree by its bark, showed her where the stream ran deep enough to fish. Maggie listened, soaking in every word, every glance he spared her. When she stumbled on a hidden root, Tobias caught her arm, not to steady her, but almost protectively, like his body had reacted before his mind could catch up. By the time they returned, Maggie felt something she hadn't felt in years: lightness, hope. That evening, Tobias built a fire while she cooked a simple stew of rabbit and potatoes. While they ate, a storm rolled in. Rain drummed against the roof, and thunder shook the cabin walls. Maggie flinched at the loudest crack. Tobias noticed. Without a word, he rose from his chair, took a blanket, and settled it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed her cheek, accidental, yet lingering long enough to make her breath catch. "You're safe," he murmured. "Storm won't hurt you." Maggie looked up into his eyes, dark, wounded, burning with something he was fighting desperately to hide. "Tobias," she whispered, "are you scared of caring about me?" His jaw tightened. His throat worked. "Yes," he said at last, "because when I let myself love, I lose everything." Maggie reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his. "You won't lose me." For the first time since she'd met him, Tobias Blackwood didn't pull away. The days that followed settled into a rhythm so natural it surprised them both. The cabin, once a silent monument to Tobias's grief, began to breathe again. Warmth returned to spaces long left cold, laughter to corners that had only known echoes. Maggie woke each morning to the smell of pine and the soft crackle of a fire Tobias had already lit. He rose before dawn out of habit, but now, instead of disappearing into the woods without a word, he lingered in the doorway, watching her stir beneath the quilt with a look he didn't seem to understand himself. "You sleep heavy," he said one morning, handing her a cup of coffee. "You walk like a bear," she answered without thinking. He blinked at her, then, slowly, awkwardly, his mouth curved into something close to a smile. It was the first smile she'd ever seen touch his face. It transformed him, warming the hard lines carved by years of solitude. And just like that, the day felt brighter. Maggie threw herself into the daily life of the cabin. She swept the floors, beating dust from rugs and scrubbing the wooden table until it gleamed. She cooked hearty meals, stews rich with herbs, cornbread baked in Tobias's iron skillet, salt pork simmered until it melted. Tobias was quieter, but he watched her with a kind of reverence, as if he couldn't quite fathom how someone could fill a space so quickly, so naturally. Every now and then she caught him staring, not at her body, though his gaze sometimes lingered with a softness that made her flush, but at her hands as she kneaded dough, or her eyes when she laughed, or the gentle curl of her posture as she sewed by the fire. He looked at her like a man remembering what home felt like. One afternoon, while Maggie hung laundry outside, a gust of wind caught one of Tobias's shirts and sent it tumbling toward the woods. She ran after it, laughing breathlessly as the fabric flapped like a clumsy bird. When she finally caught it, Tobias was suddenly behind her, having crossed the clearing in only a few long strides. "You shouldn't run like that," he said gruffly, but his hands were gentle when he took the shirt from her. "Ground's uneven." She smiled up at him. "You worry too much." He stared at her for a beat too long, his eyes darkening with something warm and conflicted. "Not enough," he said, almost to himself. Days grew into weeks. The forest turned golden, then copper, then winter white. Maggie learned how to split kindling. Tobias taught her how to set snares, how to track deer prints, how to tell when a storm was brewing by the smell of the air. At night, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked about her childhood, about his years trapping in the Rockies, about the things they'd both lost. Other nights, silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was companionable, soft. Once, when a freezing wind battered the cabin walls, Tobias rose and pulled an extra pelt down from the rack. He draped it carefully around her shoulders before settling beside her again. "You should keep warm," he murmured. "So should you," she replied. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt it like a spark pressed against her skin. Another time, after Maggie burned her hand while lifting a pot from the stove, Tobias took her hand gently in his, guiding her to the table. He grabbed a tin of salve and carefully smoothed it over her reddened skin with slow, deliberate strokes. "You should have called for me," he said quietly. "It wasn't that bad," she whispered, watching the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "It could have scarred." She almost laughed. "I have worse scars." His eyes flicked up to hers, filled with something raw. "You shouldn't." Her breath caught. "You can't protect me from everything, Tobias." His thumb brushed the edge of her palm. "I can try." Nights were the hardest for both of them. Tobias still slept on the floor, but the distance between them grew smaller each time. The first night, he laid out a bedroll across the room. The second week, the bedroll had migrated closer to the hearth. By the end of the month, he slept just beneath the edge of her bed, as if proximity alone could keep her safe. One stormy evening, The wind howled so violently that the cabin shutters slammed against the walls. Maggie woke with a cry, heart racing. In seconds, Tobias was at her side. "It's just wind," he murmured, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Nothing can get in here." "I know," she said shakily. "It just startled me." He hesitated only a moment before reaching out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "You're safe, Maggie." His voice was quiet, reverent, filled with a tenderness he tried so hard to hide. She leaned into his touch, just barely, but it was enough. Something in him broke open. His fingers slid gently to her jaw. "Maggie," he whispered like he was saying a prayer. She placed her hand over his. "You don't have to be afraid of caring about me." His chest rose and fell in a deep, shuddering breath. He looked torn apart, exposed, undone. "That's exactly why I am afraid," he admitted. "I lost everything once. I can't survive losing someone I care about again." She swallowed, voice trembling. "Then don't lose me." For a long, aching moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, hesitantly, Tobias leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. Their breaths mingled. The fire crackled softly behind them. "Maggie," he murmured, "I don't know how to stop wanting you near me." "You don't have to stop." She felt his lips brush hers, feather-light, unsure. Not a kiss, just a promise. When he finally pulled back, his voice was rough. "Get some sleep." But he stayed sitting beside her until dawn, because leaving would have felt like breaking something sacred. The first real storm of winter arrived without mercy, rolling down from the high peaks like a living beast. The air grew sharp and metallic, the sky bruised with heavy clouds, and the pines began to sway as if warning each other of what was coming. By noon, snow fell so thick it erased everything beyond a few yards. Maggie stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the world vanish beneath white. "It looks dangerous," she murmured. "It is," Tobias answered, pulling on his coat. "I have to secure the traps before they freeze over. I won't be long." Maggie turned sharply. "In this storm?" He paused. "Traps mean food. We can't risk losing them." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Tobias, you don't have to carry everything alone. Let me worry with you. Let me help." For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe longing. But then he shook his head. "You help by staying safe. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone." "Anyone?" she echoed. "Who would come up here in a storm like this?" But Tobias didn't answer. Instead, he touched the side of her arm gently, almost absent-mindedly, as if he needed to feel she was real before braving the cold. Then he left, disappearing into the wall of snow. Alone, Maggie turned back to the window, heart heavy with a strange foreboding she didn't yet understand. 2 hours passed, then 3, then 4. The storm grew worse. The wind screamed like a wounded animal. Snow slapped against the windows hard enough to rattle them. Maggie paced the cabin, wringing her hands, whispering prayers into the cold air. When the door finally banged open, she gasped and ran toward the sound, only to freeze at the sight of Tobias stumbling in, half collapsing against the wall. He was covered in snow, breathing hard, a bleeding cut across his cheek. "Tobias!" She reached him instantly, guiding him to a chair. "What happened? Did you fall? Did something attack you?" He shook his head, chest heaving. "Not an animal." "What then?" He hesitated, his jaw tightened. "A man." A chill spread through her. "Up here? In this storm?" He nodded slowly. "Name's Jeb Crane." The surname hit Maggie like a blow. "Is he—" "Silas's brother," Tobias finished. "And he ain't come for trapping." Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. "He's looking for me." Tobias didn't deny it. "He said your father made a deal, sold your labor contract to Silas. Legally, that makes you their property." "I'm not property," Maggie whispered fiercely. "Not anymore." Tobias's eyes darkened. "Damn right you're not." But Maggie saw the tension coiling in his shoulders, the way he avoided her gaze. Something else weighed on him, something heavier. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked away. "I've known Jeb might come. Folks talk in town. I heard Silas put a bounty on his missing worker." "And you didn't tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Tobias, I thought I was safe here." "You are safe," he said quickly. "I didn't want to scare you before I knew the truth." "But you did know," she whispered. "You knew there was danger, and you didn't tell me." He flinched, not from anger, but from the honesty in her words. "Maggie, I'm sorry." Silence stretched between them. The fire popped and hissed, sending shadows across the walls. Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the flames. "Is that why you didn't want me staying here?" she asked quietly. "Because you knew danger would follow?" "No," Tobias said, voice rough. "I didn't want you here because you were making me feel things I'd buried, and that scared me more than any bounty hunter." Her breath trembled. "You could have told me." "I should have," he admitted. "I'm learning how to be around someone again. It's been a long time." Hurt still lingered, but she nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me now." He stood, walked to her, and placed his large hand over hers. "Maggie, danger or not, I'm not letting anyone take you, not while I'm breathing." Before she could respond, a faint sound cut through the storm. A whistle, low and sharp, too deliberate to be the wind. Tobias stiffened instantly. "He's here," he said. A pounding knock slammed into the cabin door. Maggie jumped. Tobias grabbed his rifle and stepped between her and the entrance. "Blackwood!" a voice shouted from outside. "I know she's with you. Bring out the girl and we can talk like men. Refuse, and I'll burn you out just like your last cabin." Maggie's breath caught. "No, Tobias, don't open that door. Please." He turned to her, his face harder than stone. "I won't let him touch you." "Tobias!" But he strode forward and kicked the door open, snow swirling in like ghosts. Jeb Crane stood in the storm, wrapped in a wolfskin coat, shotgun in hand, eyes gleaming with greed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Jeb shouted over the wind. "The girl comes with me. Her father wants her back." "You're lying," Tobias said. "Her father wants money, and you want another body to break for your saloon." Jeb grinned. "Maybe, but the law says she's ours." "The law's wrong." Jeb lifted his shotgun. "Then I'll fix it myself." What followed was a clash of thunder, gunfire, the roar of the storm, Maggie's cry from inside the cabin. Tobias tackled Jeb, the two men crashing into the snow. They wrestled violently, fists and elbows flying, snow spraying with every impact. Jeb fought dirty, landing a brutal blow to Tobias's ribs. Tobias grunted, but didn't fall. "Stay behind me," he shouted back to Maggie as she stepped toward the door. Jeb swung his shotgun like a club, catching Tobias's shoulder. But Tobias caught the weapon, ripped it from his hands, and threw it into the trees. Jeb froze. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. "You should have stayed in town, Crane." One punch, heavy, unrestrained, sent Jeb collapsing into the snow, unconscious. Chest heaving, Tobias stood over him, snow clinging to his beard. Maggie ran into the storm and threw her arms around him. "Are you hurt? Tobias, talk to me." He gathered her into his arms, pulling her close, resting his forehead against her hair. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as he held her, Maggie felt the tremor in his arms, not from fear of Jeb, but from the weight of everything he hadn't yet told her. Secrets remained. Danger lingered. But for now, she clung to him, feeling his heartbeat, knowing they'd face the next storm together. Tobias dragged Jeb Crane into the cabin, binding his wrists with thick rope and propping him against the wall like a sack of grain. Maggie hovered near the fireplace, her hands trembling as she fed more wood into the flames. Snow continued pounding the roof, wind howling through the cracks as though the mountain itself were growling and warning. Tobias paced the room like a caged wolf, every muscle tight, every breath sharp. Maggie had never seen him like this, feral, furious, more wilderness than man. But underneath the rage was something deeper, fear, not for himself, she realized, but for her. Jeb groaned awake. His eyes darted around the room before landing on Maggie with a sneer. "You think he can protect you forever? Men like him die. Women like you get sold again." Maggie flinched, but Tobias was on him in a heartbeat. He grabbed Jeb by the collar and hauled him upright with terrifying strength. "You speak to her like that again," Tobias growled, "and I'll end this conversation for good." Jeb spit blood at his boots. "You think she's worth fighting for? She's nothing but—" Tobias punched him so hard the wall shook. "Tobias," Maggie cried, "stop, please." He froze, not because Jeb deserved mercy, but because Maggie's voice broke through the storm inside him. Chest heaving, he shoved Jeb back down and turned away, running a hand through his beard. Jeb wiped his mouth and laughed weakly. "Touched a nerve, didn't I? You're sweet on thee, fat girl. Didn't expect that from the great Blackwood. Thought your wife was the only woman you'd ever waste your heart on." Silence fell like a hammer. Maggie stiffened. She knew Jeb wanted to provoke Tobias, but the mention of Sarah was a knife twisted cruelly. Tobias turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "You don't get to use her name." "Why not?" Jeb taunted. "Town says you lost your mind after she died. Hid up here like a coward. Now you've replaced her with—" That was enough. Tobias lunged, but Maggie moved first. She stepped between them, planting herself in front of Jeb like a shield. Her hand shook, but her voice didn't. "That's enough. Both of you." Tobias froze mid-stride, shock flickering across his face. Maggie turned to Jeb, eyes blazing. "You don't get to talk about Sarah. You don't get to talk about me. You don't get to talk about anything. You hurt people for sport. You break women down to feel powerful. But I'm not afraid of you." Jeb's smugness cracked. Maggie stepped closer. "You think you can drag me back to that life? You can't. I'm not your property. I'm not my father's burden. And I'm not a thing to be sold. I belong to no one." Her voice softened as she turned back to Tobias. "Except where I choose to belong?" Their eyes met. Pain, fear, love, all of it in one look. Tobias's breath hitched. "Maggie?" But she wasn't done. "You keep trying to protect me by pushing me away," she said quietly. "First at the cabin door, and now with your secrets. But I'm standing right here, choosing you, even if it's dangerous, even if it hurts. I won't hide behind you anymore." Tobias swallowed hard, his voice low. "I wasn't trying to push you away. I was trying not to lose you." "You won't," Maggie whispered. "Not unless you walk away yourself." A long moment passed. The storm outside seemed to hush, as if the mountain held its breath. Finally, Tobias stepped forward and placed his hands on her shoulders, gentle, trembling, reverent. "I hear you," he murmured, "and I'm done running." Maggie leaned into his touch, relief washing over her. Behind them, Jeb let out a bitter laugh. "Touching, real touching, but you two don't get to keep me here. Once the storm clears, I'll ride down to Redemption Creek. Sheriff's on Crane's payroll. You'll both swing for kidnapping." Tobias turned toward him, but this time his expression held something colder than rage. Resolve. "You're not going anywhere," Tobias said. "Not until Maggie is safe, and not until every lie you told stops being a weapon you can use against her." Jeb scoffed. "And what's your plan? Keep me tied up forever?" "No," Tobias said. "Long enough to end this." Maggie looked between them. "What do we do now?" Tobias met her gaze with steel in his eyes and softness in his hands. "Now," he said, "we fight for the life we want." Outside, the storm began to break. Inside, something far more powerful took root, a promise that neither of them dared speak, but both of them now understood. Their lives were no longer separate. They would face whatever came next together. The storm eased by late afternoon, quieting from a monster's roar to the soft, steady hush of falling snow. The world outside the cabin turned pale and still, as if the mountain had drawn a deep breath and finally exhaled. Inside, the quiet was just as profound, heavy with things unspoken, yet shimmering with new, fragile warmth. Tobias had secured Jeb in the storage room, bound tightly but fed, the door locked from the outside. They would decide his fate when daylight came. For now, the danger was paused, like the world waiting on the far side of the storm. Tobias lit a single candle on the table. Its glow spread across the cabin, flickering in amber waves that made the wooden walls gleam. Maggie stood near the hearth, watching the flame dance, her hands wrapped around a blanket draped over her shoulders. He approached her slowly, as though she were something sacred he feared might vanish if he stepped too quickly. "Maggie," he said softly. Her name fit in his voice like it had always belonged there. "I need to say something." She turned, her eyes large and luminous in the firelight. "I'm listening." He took a breath, steadying himself. "When you came here, I told you I didn't want you here. I thought pushing you away would keep you safe. That caring for you, feeling anything again, would only drag you into the shadows I live with." Maggie's throat tightened, but she remained silent. Tobias stepped closer, the candlelight catching in the scars across his face. "But today, when you stood between me and Crane, I realized something. You're not a shadow from my past. You're the first light I've seen in 10 years. Maggie's breath caught, her lips parting slightly. He continued, voice low and rough, as if the truth scraped its way out of him. "You're brave, Maggie. Braver than me. You walk through fear. You face pain I can't even imagine. And you still choose kindness." He paused, swallowing thickly. "You still choose me." Her eyes shimmered. "I'm not going anywhere, Tobias. I don't want to go anywhere." He reached out and brushed the back of his fingers along her cheek, light as a whisper, reverent as prayer. Maggie leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. "You deserve a home," Tobias murmured. "Safety, peace, a place where no one treats you like you're worthless or something to be traded." He cupped her jaw gently. "I want this cabin to be that place, if you want it to." Maggie opened her eyes, and the love in them was quiet, but unshakable. "I want that more than anything." Emotion surged in his chest. Relief, hope, something warmer and more fragile than he'd let himself feel in years. He slid his hand to the nape of her neck, pulling her closer as Snow whispered softly against the window. "Maggie," he whispered, "you're safe here for as long as you want to stay. This is your home now, if you'll have it." Tears welled in her eyes, falling softly down her cheeks. She smiled, small, trembling, radiant. "I already chose this home, Tobias. I chose it the moment you wrapped your coat around me in that alley." He closed the remaining distance between them, pressing his forehead to hers. The candle flickered, the fire crackled, and the world outside fell utterly silent. In the warm glow of the cabin, with danger still lurking in the shadows, but something far stronger blooming between them, they held each other as if anchoring their hearts in the same place for the first time. Neither said the word love. They didn't need to. It was already here, settling into the cabin like a promise that would endure any storm. Thank you for staying with Maggie and Tobias through every breath of fear, hope, and tenderness. Stories like theirs remind us that even in the harshest winters, someone's presence can feel like the first fire after years of cold. If you're listening from a quiet room, a busy street, or somewhere far beyond these mountains, tell me, where in the world are you right now? Your voice matters here. Your comments keep these stories alive, traveling across borders and hearts. And if you still believe that love can find you in the unlikeliest places, don't go anywhere. The next story is already on its way. The Copper Ridge Depot was packed so tight that afternoon you could barely see the platform boards beneath all the boots. March wind came slicing down off the Nevada hills, kicking grit into eyes and teeth, but nobody moved. They were waiting for the eastbound train from St. Louis, and for the spectacle Silas Crane had promised them. Silas stood right up front, gold watch chain gleaming against his belly, hat tilted back in smug expectation. 40 years old, owner of 3 saloons and half the gambling tables in town, he carried himself like a man who believed God took orders from his ledger book. Beside him hovered his lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, thin as a rail and twice as stiff, clutching a leather folio and trying not to show how much the dust offended him. "You understand, Pemberton," Silas said loudly, making sure the nearest dozen people could hear. "I paid $500 for refinement. A lady, piano, French, good breeding. If they send me anything less, there will be hell to pay." "Yes, Mr. Crane," the lawyer murmured. "I have the complaint already drafted. We will pursue full restitution." The train's whistle screamed, brakes shrieked, and iron wheels ground to a stop. Doors swung open. Passengers spilled onto the platform, blinking in the bright high desert light. Miners in rough coats, a preacher with a Bible under his arm, a family with 3 dusty children. Silas scanned them all, waiting for a slim figure in a fine dress, a city lady who would prove to everyone in Copper Ridge that he'd bought himself a piece of Eastern elegance. Instead, down at the last car, a heavy woman stepped carefully onto the platform, clutching a worn valise in both hands. She was about 27, with a round, soft face and wide brown eyes that tried very hard not to look frightened. Her dress was plain brown calico, cut too tight across a body that had never once been small. Her shoulders hunched, as if she'd spent most of her life trying to make herself take up less space and always failing. She saw the sign Silas held, "Bride for Mr. Silas Crane," and walked toward him with a hopeful little smile that died before she reached his boots. "Excuse me," she said, breathless from the altitude and the stairs. "Are you Mr. Crane? I'm Abigail Morrison." The platform went quiet long enough for everyone to hear the way her voice trembled on her own name. Silas looked her up and down, slow and theatrical. His face darkened to a dangerous red. "This is some kind of joke," he barked. "I paid $500 for a lady, and they sent me a fat freight barrel. I ordered a wife, not a walking lard bucket." Laughter burst from the crowd like gunfire. A drunk by the baggage cart hooted, "Careful, Crane! She'll sink the whole town if she falls in the river." A woman pulled her little boy closer. "Don't stare, Robbie. You'll catch whatever she's got." Abby's fingers tightened on the handle of her valise until her knuckles went white. Tears burned, but she swallowed them down. "Mr. Crane, I came as quickly as I could. The agency said—" "Agency lied," Silas snapped. He turned to his lawyer. "Pemberton, you write to those thieves and tell them I want my money back doubled. I'll pay double just to ship this mistake back east on the next train." The crowd howled. Somebody actually mooed. Abby flinched like she'd been slapped. She took a half-step backward, heart pounding, eyes searching the platform for any corner of mercy, any face that wasn't twisted with mockery. That was when she saw him. He stood just beyond the edge of the crowd, towering over every man there, long black hair tied at his neck, beard rough as pine bark, buckskin stained by years of mountain weather. A rifle rested easy in one big hand. His eyes were the color of winter sky over granite, cold, hard, and watching everything. Nathaniel Blackwood. The name whispered through the crowd like a draft under a door. The beast of the Sierra, some called him. Killer, madman, recluse. He stepped forward, boots thudding on the planks, gaze fixed on Abby's tear-wet face. Silas sneered. "What do you want, Blackwood? Come to laugh at my bad investment?" Nate's voice came out low and flat, the sound of distant thunder rolling off stone. "I'll take her." For everyone listening right now, if you were standing on that platform, whose side would you be on? Tell me where in the world you're hearing this from. Which city? Which country? As we follow Abby's story deeper into the mountains. For a long moment after Nate spoke, no one on the platform moved. Not Silas, not the whispering bystanders, not even Abby, who stood frozen beneath the weight of a future she could not imagine. Nate Blackwood didn't repeat himself. He simply stepped past Silas, reached for Abby's valise, and lifted it from her trembling hands as easily as if it weighed nothing. Then he shrugged off the heavy fur-lined coat draped across his shoulders and settled it around her like a shield. "Come," he said quietly, "you're done here." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a request. It was a promise. Silas sputtered, "Blackwood, you can't just steal my property." That word hit Abby harder than the desert sun. Property. Nate didn't turn. "She ain't yours." "I paid $500, Silas shouted. "She's contracted to me." Now Nate turned. Just a little. Just enough for the crowd to catch the sharp shift in his eyes. "You paid $500 for a letter," he said, "not for a woman. And if you think you can buy one, you deserve to choke on your own money." The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. No one dared challenge Nate, but Silas had been Copper Ridge's bully for so long that his pride refused to yield. "You take her. You take the trouble that comes with her," he spat. "I'll sue you, Blackwood. I'll drag you into court if I have to drag you out of those cursed mountains." Nate shrugged, as if Silas were a gnat buzzing in summer heat. "Do what you want." He placed a gentle, shockingly gentle hand on Abby's back and guided her through the parted crowd. Abby kept her eyes down, fighting humiliation, fear, and something else she couldn't yet name. Each step away from the platform felt unreal. Each step behind the stranger who'd claimed her felt even more so. When they reached his horse, a massive black gelding with the wary eyes of an animal that trusted no one, Nate helped Abby mount, adjusting the stirrup for her height and weight without a flicker of judgment. Then he swung up behind her, reins loose in one hand. "You all right?" he asked. Abby nodded, though her throat was tight. "Thank you for standing up for me." "Didn't do it for Crane." The horse started forward. Nate's voice was calm, but something dark threaded through it. "Did it because no one deserves what happened to you back there?" The town shrank behind them, replaced by dusty trails cutting through sagebrush and scattered pines. Abby kept her eyes on the horizon. She didn't know where Nate was taking her. She didn't dare ask. Every story she'd heard about him played through her mind. Man-killer, hermit, madman of the Sierra. Fear fluttered deep in her stomach. That first night, they camped beside a cold, narrow stream. Nate built the fire while Abby sat with her hands tucked under her arms for warmth. "You should eat," he said, offering her a strip of cooked rabbit. Abby hesitated. What are you planning to do with me?" Nate didn't look up. He was cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate strokes, face unreadable in the firelight. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." "Your cabin?" "Yes." "And then?" Her voice cracked. "Will you keep me there, make me earn my keep, make me—" She swallowed hard. "Make me your wife because no one else wants me?" Though her words trembled, she forced herself to meet his eyes. Nate set the rifle aside. "I don't want anything from you that you don't choose to give." Abby blinked. "Then why help me? Why take me from the station?" For a long moment, Nate said nothing. Flames crackled. A cold wind pushed through the pines, tossing sparks into the darkness. Finally, he murmured, "Because I've seen a woman shamed in front of a town before. I couldn't let it happen again." Abby stared. "Your wife?" Nate's jaw tightened. The shadows on his face deepened. "Clara," he said. One word, heavy as stone. She wasn't small either. Folks in town called her names, laughed behind her back, same way they laughed at you today. He paused. 6 winters ago, I went out hunting. Storm rolled in faster than I could get home. By the time I made it back, Clara and our little girl had frozen." His voice dipped low. "She died holding Emma to her chest, trying to keep her warm." Abby pressed a hand to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." Nate nodded once, slowly. "Town blamed me, said I'd killed them, said I drank too much, lost my temper, did something unforgivable." He poked the fire with a stick, watching embers float upward. Folks don't need truth when a good lie makes for better gossip. Abby felt pain twist inside her, not fear now, but empathy. "You've lived alone since then?" "Yes." He looked across the fire at her, eyes cold but no longer distant. "And I didn't plan on changing that." Abby's breath caught. "Then why bring me there?" Nate considered her, head tilted slightly. "Because fate put you in front of me today," he said simply, "and because you deserved better than to be mocked in front of half the territory. You needed a place to go. I have one." Abby's eyes stung. No one in her life had ever said she deserved better, not once. Wind curled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. Abby whispered, "Thank you, Nathaniel." He shook his head. "Nate." Silence stretched between them, not empty, but gentle, settling into the space where fear had lived just hours earlier. Tomorrow they would climb higher into the Sierra. Tomorrow she would step into the cabin where his past still lived. But tonight, for the first time since she stepped off the train, Abby felt a flicker of safety, a flicker of belonging, a flicker of something she wasn't yet ready to name. The path up into the Sierra grew steeper after the second day. Narrow switchbacks carved into mountainsides, icy streams that forced the horse to wade knee-deep through freezing water, stretches of pine forest so dense the sunlight barely reached the ground. Abby had never traveled terrain like this. Each mile pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. But Nate seemed carved from the very mountains he lived in, silent, steady, unyielding. Whenever the horse stumbled, his hand would close over her hip, anchoring her. Whenever she shifted nervously on the saddle, he murmured, "Easy," in that low, gravel-toned voice that calmed even the jumpy gelding beneath them. By evening of the third night, Abby's legs trembled so badly she nearly collapsed when Nate lifted her down from the saddle. He steadied her with one large, calloused hand on her elbow. "You need rest," he said. "I'm fine," she lied, breathless. He glanced at her flushed cheeks, the sweat on her brow despite the cold air. "You're exhausted." "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. His jaw flexed, and for the first time since she'd met him, Abby saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, not at her, but for her. "Someone told you that before," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question." Abby lowered her gaze. "More times than I can count." Nate didn't speak again, but when he unpacked camp, he laid her bedroll closer to the fire than his own. He cooked a thicker stew that night, rabbit, onion, potato, and pushed the bowl toward her first. "You eat," he said. "I'll take what's left." Abby shook her head. "We should share." "We are." His tone softened. "But you need it more." Her throat tightened. No man had ever thought of her needs first. They had thought of her weight, her usefulness, her shortcomings, her silence, but not her. When she finally fell asleep that night, it was to the sound of Nate humming under his breath, an old frontier tune, low and rough, a lullaby wrapped in gravel. On the fourth morning, the trail opened suddenly, revealing a wide valley cupped between two ridges. A stream wound through the center like a silver ribbon, and perched beside it, half hidden by towering pines, was a sturdy log cabin. Nate pointed. "Home." Abby's breath caught. It wasn't large, but it was strong, crafted with care, the logs fitted meticulously, the roof reinforced with cedar shingles. A small smokehouse stood to one side, and a fenced garden, still dormant in the cold, lay on the other. "It's beautiful," Abby whispered. Nate dismounted first, then helped her down. His hands were warm even through her sleeves, and Abby felt something stir deep within her, an emotion she couldn't yet admit. Inside, the cabin surprised her even more. The floor was swept, the shelves orderly. A braided rug lay before the hearth, and atop the mantel sat a small wooden box carved with flowers. A woman's touch lingered everywhere. Nate noticed her looking. His voice was quiet. "Clara made the box, and the rug." Abby bowed her head. "I'm sorry. I don't want to intrude on your memories." "You're not." A pause. She'd want someone here. Cabin shouldn't sit empty. He led her down a short hallway to a small bedroom. The bed was neatly made, quilt folded tight. A child's doll rested on a shelf beside a tiny pair of shoes. "This was Emma's room," Nate said. "Oh," Abby whispered. Should I stay somewhere else?" "No." He lifted his chin. "This room's for you now." Her heart thudded. "Nate, are you sure?" "Yes." He met her gaze steadily. "Past is past. Can't change it. Only thing I can do is build something better going forward." A shiver, not from cold, rippled through her. She set her valise down, fingers brushing the quilt. The room felt warm, safe, as though someone had been waiting for her. That evening, Abby cooked the first meal in her new home. Simple corn cakes, roasted venison, and beans seasoned with herbs she found hanging to dry near the stove. Nate sat at the table watching her move, his expression unreadable but intent. "You've cooked before," he said. She laughed softly. "I've spent most of my life in kitchens. Not like this one." "No," she admitted, "not like this one." They ate in companionable silence until Nate stood, took her plate, and began washing everything in the basin. Abby rose instinctively. "I can do that." "I know." He glanced over his shoulder. "But you shouldn't have to after a day like today." Her lips parted slightly. She sat back down. Nate dried the last plate and hung the towel on its peg. Then he picked up a small wooden box from the mantel and set it on the table in front of her. "I'll show you something," he said, opening the lid. Inside lay several hand-carved figurines, tiny animals, tiny flowers, tiny mountains, all shaped with surprising delicacy for such large, scarred hands. "You carved these?" Abby breathed. "Yes. They're beautiful." "Clara likes small things," he said quietly. "Made her happy, so I learned how." Abby gently picked up a carved bear, the wood smooth beneath her thumb. "She was lucky to have you." Nate's throat moved as he swallowed. "No, I was the lucky one." The fire crackled. Wind brushed the cabin walls. The mountains outside stood silent as stone. Then Nate said softly, "Abby, you don't have to be afraid of me." Her breath caught. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. He studied her face for a long moment, her uncertainty, her exhaustion, the lingering hurt from the train platform. Then he nodded once. "Good," he murmured, and Abby felt, finally, that she belonged somewhere, not purchased, not rejected, not returned like damaged goods, but wanted, even if Nate didn't yet know how to say it. Spring in the Sierra Nevada came slowly, almost shyly. Snow lingered in the shadows of the pines. The creek still wore a thin rim of ice most mornings, and the wind carried a sharp bite even when the sun warmed the clearing. But inside Nate Blackwood's cabin, something softer, something fragile, began to take root. On Abby's first full morning in the cabin, she awoke to the smell of coffee and the steady crackle of a fire already burning bright in the hearth. She blinked sleepily, stretching beneath the quilt, and realized with a start someone had tucked the blanket tighter around her during the night. She hadn't done that. Only one other person lived here. Abby dressed and padded quietly into the main room. Nate stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair damp as though he'd washed up in the creek. He was stirring something in a cast-iron pot, something that smelled like oats, honey, and dried berries. He didn't look at her, but he said, "Morning." "Good morning," she murmured, still surprised. "I didn't expect you to cook." "It's food," Nate said simply. "Anyone can cook food." But Abby noticed the little details, the way he'd dusted cinnamon over the bowls, the way he'd set the table neatly, forks aligned with quiet precision. Clara had taught him those things she suspected. A pang, not of jealousy but of tenderness, touched her heart. They ate in comfortable silence until Abby wiped her mouth and whispered, "Thank you." Nate paused, spoon halfway to his lips. "For what?" "For giving me a place that feels safe." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He didn't answer, but the silence shifted, warmer, less guarded. After breakfast, Nate fetched his tools from the shed. "You don't need to work today," he said. "You've traveled enough." Abby shook her head. "I want to help." He studied her a moment, gaze drifting over the soft curve of her shoulders, the determined set of her chin. Then he handed her a small axe. "Try splitting kindling, small logs only, like this." He showed her once, precise, controlled. When it was her turn, Abby inhaled, raised the axe, and brought it down. The log split unevenly, not quite in half, but it split. Nate grunted approvingly. "Good." She noticed he stepped closer, close enough that his shadow fell across her boots. "Keep your feet apart. Don't let the axe drift left. Aim with your hips, not your arms." She tried again. This time the log cracked cleanly, splitting with a satisfying crack. Abby beamed. "I did it." "Yes," Nate said quietly, and something like pride flickered in his blue eyes. "You did." All morning they worked in a quiet rhythm, Nate chopping large logs, Abby preparing kindling, their breaths forming little clouds in the air. When she grew tired, Nate noticed before she admitted it. "Come inside," he said. "Hands will freeze if you push too long." Inside the cabin, he set a kettle over the fire and brewed tea. He slid the steaming cup toward her. She blinked. "This is the second time you've cooked for me." "You need warming up." "You too," she said. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Care offered, care received. Then Nate looked away, uncomfortable. "Don't read into it." "I'm not," Abby said softly. "I just appreciate it." By afternoon, Abby had taken over the kitchen with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. She found jars of dried herbs, sacks of potatoes, smoked venison hanging from hooks near the ceiling. She stirred the pot with practiced motions, humming to herself, the warmth of the hearth seeping into her bones. Nate stood in the doorway without her noticing, watching her move. It was the first time she looked truly at home. "You sing," he said quietly. Abby startled. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry." "Don't be." He stepped inside, his broad frame filling the kitchen. "Clara used to hum when she cooked. Cabin's been quiet a long time." Abby placed a hand over her heart. "If it bothers you, I'll stop." "It doesn't," Nate said. "It's good." Dinner was quiet but not cold. Venison stew, fresh biscuits Abby prepared from a tin of flour she'd found, and a jar of Clara's preserved peaches that Nate opened reluctantly, as though sharing something precious. Afterward, Nate cleaned the table while Abby dried the dishes. The simple domesticity, the clink of plates, the soft brush of cloth, the rhythm of two people working side by side, felt strangely intimate. At one moment, their hands touched over a fork, brief but electric. They both froze. Then Nate withdrew his hand first, clearing his throat. "Storm coming tomorrow," he said. "I need to haul extra firewood in the morning." "I'll help." "No, you stay inside where it's warm." She met his gaze. "I'm stronger than I look, Nate." His eyes dipped briefly to her hands, soft, capable, and he exhaled. "I know," he admitted, surprising her. "I've seen." That night, when the wind had begun to murmur through the trees, Abby prepared for bed in Emma's room. As she brushed her hair, she heard a soft knock. Nate? He stepped into the doorway, leaning one hand against the frame. I won't bother you long. What is it? Nate hesitated, an unusual sight in a man who carried himself like stone. You kept the fire going while I brought in the last load, he said. I noticed. Oh, she smiled shyly. I just didn't want you coming back to a cold cabin. Thank you. It was two simple words, but he said them differently this time, with something raw under the surface. Good night, Abby, he said, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Good night, Nate. When the door closed behind him, Abby pressed both palms to her warm cheeks. She had not imagined it. Something was changing, and she wasn't the only one who felt it, because across the cabin, Nate sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floorboards, jaw clenched tight. He had lived 6 years with only ghosts for company. He had promised himself no attachments, no softness, no second chances. But the woman sleeping under his roof, the woman who hummed while she cooked, who split logs with stubborn pride, who risked a shy smile even when the world had mocked her, was slipping into the cracks of his grief. And Nate felt afraid for the first time since he'd buried Clara and Emma, not of loss, not of winter, but of hope. The storm broke before dawn, wind howling, snow slanting sideways across the clearing. But inside the cabin, the fire burned bright, and for the first time in 6 years, Nate Blackwood woke to something he never expected. The sound of a woman humming in the kitchen. The storm raged for 3 days. Heavy snow smothered the mountain, burying tree stumps, fences, and every path Nate once followed by memory alone. The wind screamed against the cabin walls at night, carrying with it the distant groan of shifting ice and snapping branches. Inside, though, the world felt smaller, warmer. The fire never died. Abby baked bread twice, and Nate, for the first time in years, let silence be something shared rather than something that swallowed him whole. But storms don't just bring snow. They bring the past to your door. On the evening of the 3rd day, when the worst had finally begun to ease, Abby sat curled in Nate's rocking chair, mending a rip in his coat. She'd found the tear that morning, claw marks from the wolf that had nearly killed him weeks before. Nate hadn't asked her to fix it, but she'd done it instinctively, humming as she worked. She didn't realize Nate was watching her until his shadow fell across the floorboards. You don't have to do that, he said. Abby looked up. You need a good coat. Winter's nowhere near done. He stepped closer, lowering himself into the chair opposite hers. Something in his gaze had shifted again. Not the detached politeness he'd shown her before, not the brief warmth she'd glimpsed during the cabin work, but something heavier, something contemplative. You're not what I expected, Nate said quietly. Abby blinked. What did you expect? I expected someone who would flinch every time I spoke, someone afraid of the woods, someone who wouldn't last a day up here. She laughed softly. That person existed, before the train platform, before Silas Crane humiliated me in front of half the town, before you pulled me out of that mess. She lowered her voice. I'm not the same woman who stepped off that train. Nate's brows drew together. No, he said. You're stronger. The compliment wasn't dramatic or poetic. It was simply said, matter of fact, sincere, as though it were a truth he expected her to know already. Abby's breath hitched. Before either of them could speak again, a sudden knock rattled the cabin door. Nate's entire body went still. He rose in one fluid motion, eyes sharpening, shoulders squaring. He moved toward the door with silent precision, hand resting near the holster at his hip. "No one comes up here," he muttered. The knock came again, louder this time. Nate cracked the door open just enough to see. Snow gusted in, swirling around a hunched figure wrapped in a blanket. The man's face was gaunt, pale with cold, eyes wide with desperation. "Blackwood?" the stranger croaked. "Thank God, let me in. I'm freezing." Nate hesitated only a second before pulling him inside. The man stumbled toward the fire, shivering violently. "Name?" Nate demanded. "Allen?" the stranger gasped. "Martin Allen. I used to tend bar in Copper Ridge. You might remember me." Nate didn't answer. His eyes were unreadable. Abby fetched a quilt and wrapped it around the man's shoulders. "You're ice cold. How long were you out there?" "Too long," Allen whispered. "Lost my horse 2 miles back. Snow slid off the ridge and spooked her. I walked the rest." Nate crossed his arms. "Why come here?" Allen swallowed hard. Because they said you'd help, and because bad men are looking for you." Nate stilled. Abby froze halfway to the stove. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. "Who's looking for me?" Nate said slowly. Allen licked his cracked lips. "Silas Crane." Abby's stomach dropped. "He came back to Copper Ridge 3 weeks after the storm hit," Allen continued. "He's been drinking hard, running his mouth even harder. Says you stole his bride. Says you owe him $500. Says you tricked him in front of the whole town." "I didn't trick him," Nate said through clenched teeth. "I took her because he meant to throw her back on that train like freight." Allen nodded rapidly. I know, but he doesn't care about the truth. He's angry, Blackwood, angry in the way men get when their pride is all they have left." Nate's jaw tightened. Allen leaned closer to the fire, lowering his voice. "He hired 3 men, dangerous ones, drifters, the kind who'll kill for a handful of coins. They left town 2 days ago, headed for the mountains. I rode ahead to warn you." Abby put a trembling hand over her mouth. Nate's voice was quiet, almost calm. "What does Crane want?" "Abigail Morrison," Allen said. "He wants her back." Abby's breath left her body in a sharp, terrified gasp. Nate turned to her instantly. Something fierce, protective, deadly lit his eyes. "No," he said. "He's not touching her." Allen nodded. "That's what I figured. That's why I came." He looked around nervously. "Those 3 men, Stokes, Barrow, and Finch, they don't care about laws or judges. They care about money, and Crane offered them plenty." "How long before they reach the cabin?" Nate asked. Allen grimaced. "By morning. Maybe sooner if the storm didn't slow them." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Abby clutched Nate's coat tighter in her hands, her heart pounding. What will they do to us?" she whispered. Nate stepped to her side. "To you?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Nothing, not while I'm breathing." Abby looked up at him, eyes wide. "Nate, he means it. Silas will do anything." "I know," Nate said. He held her gaze for a long, heavy moment, something unspoken passing between them, a promise, a vow. Then he turned to Allen. "You stay the night. In the morning, you ride for help. Bring Sheriff Hawkins." Allen swallowed. "And you?" Nate's blue eyes turned to steel. "I'll be waiting for Crane's men." That night, while Allen slept near the fire, Abby sat at the edge of her bed, palms sweating, heart racing. She could hear Nate moving outside, stacking wood against the door, checking weapons, preparing the cabin like a fortress. After nearly an hour, she couldn't bear it. She stepped into the main room. Nate stood by the window, watching the tree line. "Why aren't you sleeping?" she whispered. "Can't," he said. Abby approached him slowly. "You're doing this because of me." "No," Nate said firmly. "I'm doing this because it's right." "But you could get killed." Nate turned toward her. His face was inches from hers. His voice was soft, but unbreakable. "If something happens to me, Abby, I need you to know this. I don't regret bringing you here, not one moment." Her breath trembled out. "Nate." He lifted a hand, hesitated, then touched her cheek. Carefully, reverently, as though she were something precious, he finally allowed himself to reach for. "I won't let him take you," Nate whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. Her hand rose to cover his. "Then don't do it alone," she whispered. "Let me stand with you." A flicker of emotion crossed his cold blue eyes. Fear first, then tenderness, then something deeper. "No," he said hoarsely. "I won't risk you." "You already have," she said, "the day you stepped forward at that train platform." For the first time, Nate Blackwood didn't look like a mountain man carved from stone. He looked like a man afraid to lose the one thing that had finally brought him back to life. Dawn came gray and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that crawled beneath doors and through cracks in the timber, numbing fingers and tightening breaths. The storm had died in the night, but it left behind a world of silence, a silence too deep, too heavy to be natural. Abby stood at the window, gripping the rough wood of the sill. Snow blanketed the trees. No birds, no wind, no sound except her own heartbeat. Nate was outside. He'd been out there since before sunrise, pacing the perimeter, checking the traps he'd set, scanning the ridgeline for movement. Every so often, she saw his silhouette, tall, broad, steady, moving through the pale light like a sentinel carved from winter itself. Allen had left before first light, riding hard to fetch Sheriff Hawkins. But both Abby and Nate knew help would come too late. Silas Crane's hired men were already on the mountain. A sharp whistle cut through the stillness. Nate's signal for her to step back from the window. Abby obeyed instantly. Nate pushed through the cabin door moments later, stomping snow off his boots. His face was grim, jaw tight, breath white in the cold air. "They're close," he said. "2 men at least, coming from the north ridge, the third's circling lower. They're trying to box us in." Abby swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Nate checked his rifle, then the revolver at his hip. Every movement was calm, practiced, deadly. "We keep them out. They try to break in, I stop them. You stay back from the door, near the hearth. Understand?" "No," Abby said, stepping forward. "I'm not hiding while you face this alone." "Abby, no." Her voice shook, but didn't break. "If they take you down, then what? You think Silas will show me mercy? You think those men will let me walk away?" She shook her head. "We stand together, or we don't stand at all." For a long moment, Nate stared at her, blue eyes blazing, chest rising and falling. Then something in him softened. His hand rose to her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," he whispered. "And you're the only family I have," she whispered back. A crunch of snow outside snapped them both to alert. Nate pulled away and moved toward the door, taking position beside it. Abby grabbed the spare shotgun, an old, heavy thing Nate had taught her to load the week before. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them, letting her weight ground the stock against her shoulder. Footsteps. slow, deliberate. Then a voice, low, gruff, mocking, carried through the wood. "Blackwood, you in there?" Nate didn't answer. "We know the woman's with you. Silas wants her back. Says he paid good money for her." Abby flinched. Nate's voice rose, cold, sharp as a blade. "She's not his, not yours. Turn around and get off my mountain. Last warning." The man laughed. "He said you'd be stubborn. Said you'd rather die than give her up." Another voice joined in, higher, meaner. "We ain't here to negotiate, Blackwood. We're here to collect." Nate's jaw flexed. The first man spoke again. "We got 3 guns. You got 1 woman and a cabin. Odds ain't looking good." "Then you picked the wrong cabin," Nate replied. Silence. Then the crash of boots hitting the porch steps. Nate moved in a flash, shoving the heavy oak table against the door as the first shoulder slammed into it from the other side. Wood groaned. Abby held the shotgun tight, chest heaving. Another blow. Another. The hinges rattled. "Get ready," Nate murmured. "They'll try the window next." Before he finished speaking, glass shattered on the far wall. A gloved hand reached inside, feeling for the latch. Abby fired. The blast shook the cabin, echoing through the mountains. The hand jerked back with a howl of pain. Nate's eyes snapped to her. "Good girl," he breathed. The men outside began shouting, cursing, scrambling. Then came the command, "Light it up." Abby's blood turned to ice. "Nate, what does that mean?" "They're trying to smoke us out," he said, "or burn us alive." He grabbed the bucket of water near the hearth and dumped it along the base of the door. Outside, she heard scraping, kindling being piled, a flint striking. "No," Abby whispered. "No." Nate caught her shoulders. "Look at me." She looked. "I won't let you burn," he said. "I won't let them take you, no matter what." Fire crackled outside the door, small now but hungry. Then a gunshot cracked through the air. Another, shouting. Bootsteps pounding away. Abby's breath hitched. "Nate?" He eased the door open just enough to peer out. Down the slope, 3 riders were fleeing, one clutching his injured arm, another bent low over his saddle. Behind them, riding hard through the snow, was Sheriff Hawkins with 2 deputies. "They're running," Nate said. "Sheriff's here." Abby sagged against the table, trembling with relief. Nate pushed the door fully open. Sunlight spilled in, bright against the snow. He turned back to her, this man who had been feared, shunned, whispered about like a ghost haunting the Sierra, now looking at her with a tenderness that steadied her shaking knees. "It's over," he said softly, but Abby shook her head. "No, it's not." She stepped forward, took his hand, and pressed it to her heart. "Nate, I choose you. No matter who comes, no matter what storm hits this mountain, I'm not going anywhere." Nate exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, as though those words had been trapped inside him for years. "Then come here," he whispered. She stepped into his arms, and the world finally felt safe. The deputies helped put out the smoldering kindling outside the cabin, stamping snow over the embers until only steam rose. Sheriff Hawkins tipped his hat to Abby and Nate, his eyes sharp but respectful. "You two'll be safe now," he said. "Crane's men won't be back, and Crane himself will answer for hiring gunmen. I'll see to that." Nate nodded. "Thank you, Sheriff." Abby murmured her thanks as well, her voice soft, still trembling from the echo of danger. When the deputies finally rode off, the mountain sank back into its familiar silence. Wind brushing through pines, the far-off call of a raven, the faint crack of distant ice shifting. Inside the cabin, the warmth felt richer than it ever had. The fire glowed steady and golden, casting slow-moving shadows along the log walls. Abby stood near it, rubbing her arms above the blanket Nate had wrapped around her shoulders. The room smelled of pine smoke and coffee grounds, the scent of safety, of home. Nate closed the door and slid the heavy crossbar in place. Then he stood still, watching her. Her hair was tousled, cheeks flushed from cold and fear, eyes bright but tired. Yet to him, she had never looked more beautiful. She had stood with him. She had fought for their life. She had refused to hide. Abby turned and caught him staring. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Nate moved closer, slow and careful, as though approaching something fragile and beloved. "Because I almost lost you today." "But you didn't." She stepped toward him, too. "And I wasn't going to let them take you either." He reached for her hand, holding it gently, his thumb brushing over the bruised knuckles from gripping the shotgun too hard. "Abby, I need you to understand something. I've lived on this mountain for years with nothing but ghosts for company. I thought that was all my life would ever be. I thought I didn't deserve more." "You deserve everything," she whispered. Nate shook his head, emotion tightening his throat. "Not until you. You're the first warmth I've had since Clara and Emma. You brought life back into this cabin, back into me." He looked down at their joined hands, his voice low. "When I saw those men coming, all I could think was that I'd rather die on that snow than see you taken." Abby's eyes filled with tears, not of fear now, but of something softer, deeper. She cupped his face in both hands. "Nate, you don't have to face anything alone anymore. Not grief, not danger, not life on this mountain. I'm here. I choose this. I choose you." He closed his eyes briefly, as though soaking in the words like sunlight. When he opened them, the storm inside him had quieted. They stood there for a long moment, the fire crackling beside them, snow glittering outside the window, their breaths mingling in the warm air. Finally, Nate spoke, voice steady as a vow. "You're safe here." Abby pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the strength of his heartbeat beneath her palms. "It's your home now," he murmured into her hair, "if you'll have it." Abby let out a trembling breath. "I already do." In the hush of the cabin, wrapped in the glow of the fire and the memory of danger left behind, they stood together. No fear, no distance, no past that could pull them apart. Just warmth, just love, just the beginning. Stories like this remind us how fragile a heart can be until it finds a place to rest. Abby arrived in the West humiliated, unwanted, and cast aside for a price on a piece of paper. Nate lived as a ghost on a mountain, carrying grief too heavy for any one man. Yet the storm that tried to break them instead bound them together. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? Which city? Which country? Your comments keep this channel alive. And if you still believe in love that redeems the forgotten, stay with me. The next story is already on its way.